As one of our projects at an institute that I'm very involved in, in working with community-based organizations, we shifted the question a little bit. And the question started to become not what is the racial wealth gap in the United States, but over a period of time, is it increasing, narrowing, or staying the same? And this, I think, is a great puzzle in thinking for people who like to think about what is the impact of the past on the present.
What's up, YouTube family? Welcome back to my space. This is Evans Raiola, and guys, on today's video we want to talk about the racial gap in terms of wealth in the US between the white folks and the black folks. And to speak to us today is Tom Shapiro. He is a prominent scholar in the study of wealth inequality, particularly as it pertains to racial disparities in the United States. His work builds upon and extends the research of Oliver and Shapiro in the influential book Black Wealth, White Wealth, a new perspective on the racial inequalities, first published in 1995. In this book, there are key themes of black wealth, white wealth. The first one is the wealth gap. The book emphasizes the vast disparity in wealth gap between black and white Americans, arguing that this gap is a crucial factor in understanding the racial inequality. Wealth, more than income, determines one's access to opportunities, security, and social mobility. And the other sector that we want to look about in today's topic is the historical roots. Shapiro and Oliver trace the origins of the wealth gap to the historical injustices such as slavery, segregation, and discriminatory housing policies. They show how these systematic issues have left a lasting legacy, contributing to persistent wealth disparities. So guys, I want us to watch this video of him talking about the wealth gap between black folks and white folks in the US. Then we'll get to understand what has been the problem. Is it slavery? Is it segregation over the years? Is it the black folks to be taken as inferior guys in the US community, in the US societies? We want to learn from that in this video. So let us watch this video and then we will stop it at the end and do a critical analysis of the same. Let's watch this, guys.
As one of our projects at an institute that I'm very involved in, in working with community-based organizations, we shifted the question a little bit. And the question started to become not what is the racial wealth gap in the United States, but over a period of time, is it increasing, narrowing, or staying the same? And this, I think, is a great puzzle in thinking for people who like to think about what is the impact of the past on the present. There's a line of thought that I think goes like this: whatever happened in the past was horrible, and it provides us with different starting points, especially in terms of family wealth. But whatever that starting point we got should be about the same. The level shouldn't differ. The lines or the slope shouldn't differ. And what I'm going to suggest is, if that line for white families goes up and it doesn't for African American families to the same degree, then what's getting worse. If those lines start to converge at some point, it's getting better. And we can think about why that might be the case. So what we did was to follow the same set of families in a data set that allowed us to first look at them from 1984 to 2009 and then 2011, so a period of 27 years, and ask the question, what happened to the racial wealth gap among that same set of families experiencing similar public school systems, similar enough American social and public policy, the American political environment, American workplace and recessions and boom periods. And how did all that work itself out in terms of black wealth, white wealth? Well, the first data point you see on the far left, and the dollars are calibrated to 2009 dollars, parenthetically here. Median wealth, white families, is the blue line. and it has a great trajectory. Except for a blip, the Great Recession, has a great trajectory. It increases in a very robust manner. The dollars are adjusted for inflation. That's real growth. The African American line here is the red or magenta-ish line closer to the bottom. And there are two things that need to be pointed out. One, very importantly, there is some very good growth. But at the same time, look at the space in the middle. The distance between the lines keeps growing, such that the racial wealth gap following the same set of families as they go through the life course in all those institutions we talked about almost triples. All right. Palpably, objectively, the racial wealth gap as I think, a good metric of economic racial inequality in the United States gets worse, and significantly worse. I've been doing this work for a long time, and it's, I like to say, one of the amazing factoids, if you will, is that when I talk, nobody has ever challenged the data. No one's come out and said, oh, Shapiro, you're full of it. Social sciences doesn't know what they're doing. What's the error margins? I've got another, I've got two neighbors, one black and one white, and they do this and they do that. The data points are never really challenged at all. What is challenged vehemently is the narrative. What's the explanation? Why is the racial wealth gap growing in the United States? So to try and get at, in a more scientific way, some answers to those questions, we looked at this chart that is a product of some of our research, and did some relatively deep analysis that tried with regressions and other techniques that asked the question, what accounts for the largest areas of growth in the racial wealth gap in the United States? And just quickly, because I'm going to go into it in a bit more detail momentarily, just quickly, by far the largest area is home ownership and property ownership. It accounts for something like 28% of the difference in the growth between white and black wealth. Second area includes income, and it is not family income, it is the increase in income between 1984 and 2009. That is, what's the wealth action, if you will, on every dollar of increased income? Does it look similar for whites as it does for African Americans? And that turned out to be also a very large driver of the increasing racial wealth gap. Education, and here, again, we were not looking, if you will, simply at educational or achievement gaps. We were looking at college-educated black and white families and controlling for that and asking, is the return on wealth from that same, at least degree, what does that look like in terms of how it translates or converts to wealth for white and black families? That also is a large producer of both wealth and an increase in the racial wealth gap. So I want to be clear, education is important, especially higher education, and the jobs, the income, and the wealth that flow from that are far greater than a high school education. At the same time, there are dynamics within that process and how those educational achievements are rewarded that continues to drive the racial wealth gap in the United States. All right, so let me get to what I really want to get to. I want to look at three of the areas of largest drivers. I want to start with education, I'm going to go to work and income, and I want to end with home ownership because it's the deepest and it's the most complicated one to think about and to talk about. So eliminating disparities in college education and the return on a college degree in the work we've done has a modest direct impact on the racial wealth gap. Now let me explain what I mean by that first and how we got to that, and then I'll show a few numbers to indicate it. We have produced, quick advertisement here, we've produced a tool that we call the racial wealth audit. And it is a technique, a set of techniques really, that allows us to look at knowing what the racial wealth gap is, and having modeled through what are the predictors of black wealth, what are the predictors of white wealth, what are the predictors of Latino wealth. If you change those predictors, how much more or less wealth one gets. So that allows us to look at a policy or a policy proposal or an institutional change and ask the question, if whites and blacks and Latinos had the same college degrees, what would the action be on closing the racial wealth gap? All right. So now here I want to start posing it's not really a dichotomy, let's call it a spectrum, because I'm not sure it's a binary at all here, because I want to talk about how it intersects. That's talking about rates. That's talking about access. That's talking, if you will, paradigmatically of liberals and many of my friends in the progressive movement. Right? Where we focus on access to college and college completion. Very important. I am not diminishing that by any means whatsoever. All right? But that's what I call the access and the opportunity. As a other part of that, we don't ask the question, and this is what I am going to try to ask and answer a bit and confuse me and everybody else. The question we want to ask is, for that college completion, are there structures that actually produced different wealth for whites and blacks? And produces it in a way that there is more wealth, that it actually increases or decreases the racial wealth gap. All right, so quick pieces of data here. I indicated there would be modest action. If policy, or anything else, successfully eliminated racial disparities in college graduation rates, black wealth would grow per every family, if you will, about $1,300. The gap, racial wealth gap between whites and blacks, would shrink by about 1%. Right. The $1,300 gain is very important. I want to keep emphasizing that. But I also want to suggest, if we're looking at that glass about how to get parity and the projects that are needed and the structural changes that are needed to move us in that direction, simply removing barriers to college graduation rates doesn't have a whole lot of action at that level. Latinos, the action is a little greater. It reduces the racial wealth gap by about 3%. All right. There's more action. If we hypothetically say, let me tell you how we do this quickly. For the wealth that a white family returns or converts for a college degree, if we take that and give it hypothetically in a model to African American or Latino families, then you've equalized the return. You've said that the return from a college degree is roughly the same for whites, African Americans, and Latinos. If this were done, black wealth would grow by $10,000. Latino growth by about $5,800. The racial wealth gap between whites and African Americans shrinks or narrows by 10%. Right. 1% reduction on equalizing rates of college completion, 10% action on the return to wealth. For Latinos, it's 6%. All right.
Family, you've heard from Tom Shapiro speaking about the issues of black wealth, white wealth, and he says that the biggest question right here is, the question is, what is the racial wealth gap? Is it increasing, narrowing, or staying at the same point? And after you've heard from the conversation that we've just had from the white professor, he emphasizes that the rate at which there is a gap between the white folks and the black folks is so alarming. It's usually a big gap, and many a times people ask themselves questions. Why is there a big gap between the wealth of white people and black people in the US? Is it because the black people have always been taken as inferior? Is it because these two races are not getting equal opportunities? Are white people segregating good jobs for themselves while black people are struggling to get these opportunities? What could be the secret? And that is exactly what the professor has tackled in this video. He's tried to go deeper and deeper to make us understand why it is difficult for the wealth gap between black folks and white folks in the US to be the same. He says it's becoming more and more difficult over time. After studying wealth gap from a set of families from 1984 to 2009, or rather from 1994 to between 2009 and 2011, for like a period of 25 to 27 years, there is some really good growth, but the racial gap almost triples. He gives an illustration of a graph in the video that shows the white graph in a blue curve going straight above. Then for the black folks, moving slowly up, moving slowly up. But now the gap between the two of them is actually tripling. It's becoming even more and more difficult for black folks today to try and merge the gap between the white wealth and the black wealth in the US. Why is the racial wealth gap growing in the US? There are three perspectives to look up to that will try to explain to us why this gap is increasing. The first thing it says is the largest area is home ownership and property ownership. It counts for 28% of the growth between white and black wealth. Does it mean that white people do own more properties in the US than black people? Do white people own more houses than black people? Because this is the largest area that gives about the largest part in the difference between the black wealth and white wealth, which is 28%. Does black people not get the opportunities to own homes in the US? I think it's more difficult for a black man to own a home in the US than that of a white person. But now times are changing, but it's still difficult for these graph to merge. It is still difficult for the wealth difference to get closer and closer because white started the race earlier than us. In a video that I did recently of Pastor Fred Price, he spoke about he spoke about white folks starting the race early than black folks, and he mentioned that black folks can never compete with white folks. If it was 100 meters race, the white folks started the race at around 90 meters, they were only left with 10 meters to complete, while the black folks were starting the race from 0 all the way to 100 meters. So it is always so difficult for white folks to for black folks to come and reach the point that our white folks are in right now in the US, because they started the race earlier. We started the race late, so it is difficult. That explains how difficult it is for the wealth difference between these two races, between black and white people. It is difficult for black people to beat the white folks who started the race at the 90 meters mark. That analogy of Dr. Pastor Fred Price just explains that it is difficult for this to merge. Then number 2 is income. The increase in income between 1984 to 2009, wealth action of every dollar in increased income. Is it similar for whites and black Americans? No, it's not. It's obviously not similar. Then the third point to look at is the college education between black and white families. How they are converted to wealth. Higher education is a big determinant. There is how the college graduation can easily be converted to wealth. In this topic, the professor tries to explain if black folks and white folks get a similar opportunity in the higher education, and both of them graduate with similar degrees, you know, the margin between the black folks and white folks slowly reduces by a small margin, you know. He says there is a tool known as the racial wealth audit. It is a technique if white folks, blacks, and Latinos have the same college degrees, what will be the action? What will be the action on the racial wealth gap? The wealth gap between black and white households would shrink by only 1%. That's how difficult for black folks to be able to beat the white folks when it comes to matters wealth in the US. So guys, kindly do consider subscribing to my channel for amazing black stories in Africa and in the diaspora. Currently, I am doing a series on the history of black folks in the US, and on today's video, we were trying to uncover the secrets behind the wealth gap between the two races in the US, between the blacks and whites, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Kindly do consider subscribing to my channel, comment down below and let me know what you think about today's video. And guys, I'll be so grateful if you also like this video so that it can be recommended to other YouTube users, guys. And as we end this video, I'd also urge you guys to support me through super thanks down below, and I'll be so grateful, guys. See you all in my next video. Goodbye.